Welcome back, guys. Today we will be attempting the 2020 paper 2, the macroeconomics paper for Edexcel. Let's get started and jump straight into our section A. So it looks like we have a bit of a graph here, and let's see what the question is asking us. Total real GDP, the real UK GDP in 2016 was 200 million. With reference to the chart above, calculate the total real UK GDP for 2017. So 2 marks, calculate the total real GDP, and it's showing us annual percentage change from 2014 to 2017. So in 2016 it was 200 million, and now the percentage change in 2017 is 1.7. So what am I going to do with my calculator? I'm going to take 200,000 and then I'm going to divide that by 100. And then once I've divided it by 100, I'm going to times it by 101.7, and that should give me my percentage change, and that is going to give me 203,400. So 203,400, and of course that would be in millions. But of course, always show your workings. So I'm just going to quickly do my workings. I'm going to do 200 million divided by 100 times by 101.7. to give us 203.400, comment 400, and like I said, it's in millions. So yeah, that is a very simple question and really easy maths question there. So let's keep going and let's move on from there. Okay, so another 2-mark question, and it's an explain question. So explain the term real gross domestic product. So again, very straightforward question. Let's start with real. Real, of course, means adjusted for inflation. Then what is gross domestic product? It is, of course, a measure of output. GDP measures the total output in the economy. Of course, you can define it in many different ways: total expenditure, total income in the economy. A really good thing with developing macro chains of analysis, though, that I always explain in the live classes to my students, is try to fully understand and grasp what GDP means. A really good way to think about it, of course, real is adjusted for inflation, but gross is the amount. Domestic, of course, is where it's made. So, for example, in the UK, and product is goods and services. So, when we talk about GDP increasing, what's actually happening? The amount of goods and services that are being produced in the UK is increasing. Therefore, you can, of course, link that to many different chains of analysis. For example, if there's more goods and services being produced in the UK, the amount of goods and services have increased. This will therefore mean who produces these goods and services? Of course, the factor of production of labour. Therefore, if there's more goods and services being produced in the UK, it's a very valid assumption to assume that we need more workers to produce these goods and services. Therefore, that's where we make that link of derived demand. The demand for workers is derived from the demand for goods and services. So whenever you see an increase in real GDP, especially on your ADAS diagrams, so real GDP increasing, of course, always link it to there's more goods and services being produced, we need more labour, then of course the macro objective of positive economic growth. But that's a side topic, but yeah, that is how to get 2 marks there. And let's finish this first question off with a multiple choice. With reference to the chart on page 2, which of the following is correct over the period shown? GDP per capita was highest in 2014. It does not say anything about capita, doesn't tell us population size, so that would not hold since we have no data about GDP per capita. Inflation rose in 2015. Again, it does not tell us anything about inflation rates, so that would not hold either. The UK economy grew at the fastest rate in 2014. Let's see this. Yes, over this time period, that does look correct. I would say that is correct. And then the UK economy was in recession in 2015. So we had positive growth in 2015, but that does not rule out whether there was a recession or not, since it says here the annual percentage change, the first 2 quarters could have been in a recession, they could have not been, as of course, recession is just defined as 2 consecutive quarters of negative economic growth, but essentially we don't have enough data to determine that. So yeah, the answer therefore would be C, the answer therefore would be C, and therefore that is how to get 5 out of 5 marks on that question 1. Very simple and very quick question. If I was doing it without explaining it, I could probably get that done in 30-40 seconds, and that's what you want to be aiming for. If you can pick up 5 marks in less than a minute, that is a massive surplus you've gained, and just giving yourself an advantage for the rest of the paper. Moving on to the second question. So, you have a lot of words here. So, let's go straight to the question. If the value of the multiplier was 1.8, which one of the following will be the total increase in GDP from the redevelopment, assuming all other things are equal? Let's have a read of the stimulus. The planned investment of the redevelopment of the Dover port will cost 115 million. Okay, so that's given us the value, but let's keep reading. The chief executive said it will lead to many new jobs, transform waterfront, new cafes, bars, shops. So it looks like it's a question about multiplier effect. How do we work this out? So 115 times 1.8, very simply. Let's slap this into the calculator. 115 times 1.8. That will give me 207, therefore the answer would be 207. Let's keep going. So the 4-mark question, using the example above, explain. So the explain question, how the multiplier process will lead to an increase in aggregate demand. Talk specifically about aggregate demand. 4-mark question, of course, remember, in your 4-mark section A questions, always 1 mark for application. It's talking about aggregate demand. First thing I'm going to just start with is a diagram. You will definitely pick up marks here for a diagram. It specifically mentions aggregate demand, so real GDP. Of course, how do we show the multiplier on a diagram? We just show AD shifting out several times. I won't do it any more than, I'll probably do it 3 times here, but you don't need to do it 3 times. But yeah, so just showing how real GDP is increasing and how price level will also increase. And this is the thing with these 4-mark questions. If you know where the marks are allocated, you don't even really need to give like an actual response. You can just throw in random things and you can pick up the marks. For example, I could just throw in now, the initial investment was 115 million. And now that is, I would say, around 3 marks already. And I haven't even really addressed the question because I've shown the multiplier effect. I've picked up my application mark. Here, I could probably just throw in the multiplier ratio or the multiplier formula, 1 divided by 1 take away MPC. I'll probably pick up the marks, but let's actually, for the sake of the video, let's actually give it a response. So there's many different ways to define the multiplier effect, but it's essentially where an initial investment, it compounds and has several knock-on effects on real GDP on AD. Okay, so I wouldn't write anywhere near as much as this. I've stopped myself there because I want to make it representative of how much you need. But you don't need anywhere near as much as this. I'd probably cut it off there, but I just want to explain what's actually going on. So what I've written so far, the multiplier process is where an initial investment, the 115 million, has compound effects on real GDP and AD. Given another example, I don't need to do this since, of course, I've already picked up the application mark, but London Olympics, there was a multiplier effect there where in 2012, the UK government spent around 8 billion on stadiums, on other things, on the Olympics, and real GDP increased around to 16 billion due to the Olympics. So, of course, shows the multiplier effect. Why does this happen? Just, again, you don't even need this for the marks. We're just explaining the process to you, since, of course, when the UK government spent on the London Olympics, they created stadiums, they created jobs. Now, those individuals that now have jobs have an increased income. What they're going to do with those increased income, they're going to consume, therefore increased consumption. Of course, that's going to shift AD, but that consumption, where they're spending it in shops, they're spending it in local firms, they're spending it in restaurants. That will therefore increase the profits, the sales, the revenues for those firms. Firms are profit maximizers. If they're selling more, they're likely to expand. That expansion will hire more jobs. It will, the restaurant, for example, if they're doing really well, they might open another restaurant, and therefore they need more jobs, more workers, and then that basically will compound, and that cycle repeats where there's now more workers, they now have incomes, they're going to spend those incomes, and it's going to keep repeating until, of course, that is why the multiplier effect is just several shifts out of AD, and it keeps going and keeps going. But yeah, that is how to get 5 out of 5 marks on this second question. And like I said, let's keep going. And a question on the IMF. So explain the role of the International Monetary Fund in providing financial assistance to countries such as Argentina. 4 marks here. In 2018, the International Monetary Fund lent Argentina 57 billion as part of its bailout package to prevent the country's government defaulting on its debts. The financial crisis also caused significant capital flight out of Argentina's economy. Okay, slightly off topic from the question, but in the life classes, one of the main case studies we learn about is Argentina. Why? Since the Argentinian economy is quite interesting. A really good stat to remember is in 2022, Argentina was quite popular. Why was that? That was because of the World Cup. Argentina played versus France in the World Cup final, where unfortunately Argentina won the World Cup and France lost. But now let's comment on the economic status of these two countries. During that World Cup final, let's talk about the inflation rates. Argentina's inflation rate was 95% during that World Cup final, whilst France's was around 5%. So even though Argentina won the World Cup, you could say France won the real life cup. But on a serious note, Argentina does suffer with extremely high levels of inflation, and it's just quite a memorable one. So when they won the World Cup in 2022, they were suffering from nearly 100%, nearly triple digits inflation rates. So it's a decent one to remember. But back onto the question. So the role of the IMF in providing financial assistance to countries like Argentina. So what does the IMF essentially do? So they provide economic stability essentially. Since they want to, well, they try to provide economic stability, And why is that? For example, the main problem here was Argentina is going to default on their debts. And if Argentina defaults on their debts, the main thing it is going to affect is their currency, the Argentinian pesos, where if governments would default on their debt, essentially currencies become worthless, and that's the main issue there. So the IMF tries to provide economic stability via giving out loans. And of course here, 4-mark question, there's going to be an application mark. I'm going to say 57 billion as part of bailout project. Argentinian pesos becoming worthless / stops currency crisis. You can word it in a different way. You can call it exchange rate crisis. It provides exchange rate stability, whatever you want to call it. But I'm going to write a bit more since I don't think I've written enough here to pick up 4 marks. I'm essentially just going to talk about how IMF, it's almost like a last resort lender where it only lends to countries when basically nothing else works. So if banks would lend to Argentina, the IMF would not give them this bailout package, but essentially that the banks don't trust Argentina since, of course, due to the instability within the country. Therefore, the IMF have to come in and bail them out to try provide some sort of short-term stability. And then, of course, in the long run, it does try to help out with strategies to solve the country's problems in the long run. Of course, since who is being affected in this scenario is the consumers, it's the individuals of the country, it's the living standards of the everyday people in the country, where when these countries are poorly managed, they're going through tough times, such as very high inflation rates. It does massively degrade living standards. Those corporations such as the IMF, even though they're not very good in many different things, but in this scenario, yeah, they do help out. Yeah, the living standards of the individuals are affected, and individuals go through extremely harsh poor living standards. Therefore, these organisations step in to try to help out. So that's pretty much all I'd write for 4 marks there, and let's keep going. So we have a multiple choice question here. So which of the following is most likely to happen to Argentina's currency value as the result of capital flight? So what's capital flight? Essentially money moving out of Argentina with a floating exchange rate system. So let's think very simply. So we have supply of the Argentinian pesos, demand of the Argentinian pesos, exchange rate, quantity of pesos. Of course, make sure you know this diagram. Such a simple but effective, especially in a valuation diagram. But of course, we say there's capital flight, which will increase the supply of Argentinian pesos. Why? Because individuals are trying to move their currency, move the Argentinian pesos into things like US dollars. Therefore, it's going to increase the supply of Argentinian pesos. Very simply, what's going to happen to exchange rate? Exchange rate is going to go from exchange rate 1 to exchange rate 2. Therefore, of course, what do we call it when exchange rate goes down? We of course call it a depreciation. Therefore, that would be our answer B. But of course, let's rule out the other ones. It would not be appreciation since, of course, supply shifting out. Let's think about the other two, devaluation and revaluation. Remember, what does it say in the question? It says it's a floating exchange rate system. These would only occur in fixed/managed exchange rate systems, as it requires government intervention within the market. But yeah, that's how to get 5 out of 5 marks on this question 3. Let's keep going with this question 4. Let's talk about unemployed persons in the UK measured by the claimant count in thousands. It's a 2-mark question. Calculate the percentage change in the number of unemployed persons between April and July 2016. So we have April and we have July 2018. The advice show workings. So of course, what am I going to do? I'll show it actually on the screen. So 910 take away 894, and then what is the original? The original is of course 894. Times that by 100. Let me slap that in my calculator. That's going to give me 1.78 percentage points. So that will be my answer. And it's going to give me 1.789. So I'm going to round it up. 1.79 percentage. Okay, and that's how to get 2 marks there. Let's keep going. Another 2-mark question. Explain one likely reason for the increase in the number of unemployed in the UK over the time period shown. So we talk about 2018 here. And why might there be an increase in unemployment? Okay, so usually this question, 9 out of 10 times, would be 2008, because the classic one, of course, is financial crisis. But we're thinking 10 years in the future. Of course, Brexit occurred in 2020, but I think it still would be a relevant reason here that the increase in number of unemployment is like uncertainty due to England leaving the European Union, and you could talk about how businesses aren't investing as much because they don't know what's happening in the future, thus causing, because there's 2 marks there, thus causing, because explain one likely reason, and so then just a bit of analysis. So businesses won't invest, thus of course causing higher rates of unemployment as it's less derived demand for labour, you could say. So this is a bit of a tricky one, to be honest. You can give lots of different reasons. So yeah, let's keep going. Let's get 2 marks there. And let's go to the last multiple choice here. Which of the following types of unemployment is most likely to be caused by technological change in an industry? Without even looking at it, you should know the answer there. It's structural. And of course, we saw this in Margaret Thatcher's time in 1948, I believe. I'm not too sure about that start, actually. But where she closed down the mines, and then we moved from being more of a northern physical product to move into a more financial services, London, accounting, lawyers services, etc., etc. But yeah, the answer there would be structural, of course. But why is it not the other ones? Cyclical, of course, that depends on cycles. So for example, the economy goes through the business cycle, essentially. We go through recessions, we go through booms, and that type of unemployment would be called cyclical, so it's not that. Real wage unemployment, of course, is caused by the concept of minimum wages. Since why, of course, minimum wages, the main thing, easiest summary of minimum wages, they benefit individuals who are employed. Why? Because they receive a higher wage, but then less individuals are employed. Why? Since at higher wages, firms they don't demand as much labour, as of course it's more expensive for them to demand it. And then lastly, seasonal. Of course, seasonal is like ice cream. There's a lot of demand for ice cream in the summer, not much in the winter, thus it varies the level of employment. But yeah, that is 5 out of 5 marks for that question 4. And let's keep going to this question 5. So this is draw an aggregate demand and aggregate supply diagram showing the likely impact of this new bridge on price level and real output. It looks like a really simple, a really easy 4-mark question, but let's see what is happening to the bridge. So I'm not even going to try to say this name. This Hong Kong is the longest sea bridge. It reduces the journey time from Hong Kong to I'm not going to try to say that either, from 4 hours to just 30 minutes. It costs the equivalent of $18 billion. It was government funded, so of course this is going to lead to AD shifting out. Okay, so which curve is this going to affect? So of course we have the LRAS and we have the AD. You could shift either one out essentially. AD, why is it going to shift AD out? Since of course you're spending 18.8 billion on government spending, and of course one component of AD is C plus I plus G is G, therefore of course we'll shift AD out. And then LRS, you could also say that why, since it's definitely increasing the productivity, increasing the productive potential of the economy. Since, for example, workers, instead of tracking 4 hours, they can get there now 30 minutes, definitely increasing productive potential of the economy. But whichever one you want to mention, it doesn't really matter. So real GDP, and then of course LRS. And just for simplicity's sake, I'm going to shift the AD out. AD shifts to AD1, and then of course make sure to label it PLE. YE, PL1, Y1, show the change. And yeah, that is how to get 4 out of 4 marks there. And yeah, let's keep going for the last question of this section A. Which of the following would most likely to solve a negative output gap problem in a domestic economy? Okay, an increase in government funding to the World Bank. that even if you didn't do economics, I'm pretty sure you'd be able to say that would not solve the problem in the domestic economy, since you're not spending on the domestic economy. Government spending on foreign aid, again, you're not spending on your own economy, so that would not increase, not solve the negative output gap. Government spending on public transport, yes, so just an example of supply side policy helps the domestic economy. An increase in income tax would worsen the negative output gap. Why? Since it leads to less spending, less consumption, and therefore would further that negative economic growth. So yeah, C would be the answer there, and that's how to get 25 out of 25 on this section A for 2020 paper 2.